Hi, I'm Tom Meschen, and welcome to the award-winning Power in Politics podcast, the conversation about the issues that are impacting you the most with the people, the advocates, those that are making those decisions, and holding them accountable along the way, too. Today, we sit down with Assemblymember Mary Beth Walsh. The Republican is the floor leader on the Assembly side of the state capitol. We speak to her about some pretty big issues right now, political violence and how she thinks the governor has handled that, and also those on her side of the aisle. We also get into criminal justice reform, which will be the topic once again as we get back into session in January. Also the climate law. She signed on to a letter recently about that. So that's what we have for Mary Beth Walsh today. Thanks so much for joining us. As always, you can listen wherever you get your podcasts at Power in Politics or on YouTube at CBS 6 Albany. Assemblymember Mary Beth Walsh joins us here today. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
No, pleasure.
We have a few different things to get to here as we reach the end of the month of September and we approach the session coming up in January, but also a lot going on in the world around us. And recently, the governor holding a bipartisan, if you will, coalition of lawmakers in the Capitol, and you were on virtually that day along with some of your colleagues on the minority side. I guess, what did you make of the governor doing that and trying, I guess, make a statement under the same light in the midst of this current discourse, you could say, and this current atmosphere in the country?
Well, I think it was appropriate to have a response to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and I think that it made all of us who are in elected office, worry. We're worried. We're getting. I haven't gotten any personal threats of violence against me, but certainly if you look at our social media feed, I mean, there's some really awful inflammatory comments. And I think it's really important as an elected official for all of us to check in with ourselves and ask, how are we conducting ourselves and in a way that is positive, that's informative, that is dignified and respectful of others. And, so I appreciated the thought to do it, the idea of, disagreeing without being disagreeable, and how we do set a tone. I mean, I've learned that really I can only control my own behavior and the way that I operate. I mean, we could all cherry pick. I could cherry pick statements that the governor has made in recent months that I thought were very intemperate, that were very inflammatory. But I appreciated the idea that she wants to kind of turn the page on that, and she's checked in on her own rhetoric and is encouraging all of us to do the same. I think that we need to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I think one of my colleagues, Quinn Alexander, asked her about the going to war
I heard him ask that.
Rhetoric that she used when it came to redistricting. And I think you're right. I think she did sort of, it was a very honest answer. Yes. I could say that she said, yeah, maybe in the future I will need to rethink that. Yeah. In terms of the bridges being built, are there steps to be taken, do you think, that could help when it comes to some of the back and forths that are had, even as someone that does as you are on the floor, I guess, when it comes to some of those interactions?
Well, that's part of my job as floor leader, is if I feel like things are starting to go off the rails with debate, it's really up to me to try to rein it in with the help of a few other people on the floor. And I think, just calmer heads have to prevail when we're taking up really emotional topics. And, ironically, with the majority passed empty seat voting, when we're debating a good number of times, there's nobody really that we're debating to because they've swiped in and they've gone back to their offices or they're out of town. So in a way, when I first started 9 years ago, and it was a full chamber when we were taking on some of these debates, and I know we'll be talking about other criminal justice issues and other things that at the time were extremely, and it still are, but were very contentious when first debated. There was a different vibe in the chamber, and it did get, at times, it really tipped into something that was, not great. Yeah. I think I thought that was a very honest answer from the governor as well. I thought, some of her comments leading up to the last election, I thought were very, very troublesome, just kind of lumping, almost like the Hillary Clinton statement about, the basket of deplorables. It was like that. It was like Republicans are anti-American. We should all move out of New York. And, I understand we're all kind of hyped up. We're getting towards an election, and it was a very consequential election. And, everybody gets kind of amped up. But we need to check in, and we need to say, hey, we need to behave as the professionals that we are.
Do you think, I should ask too, though, I mean, at least Stefanik does have a similar way of speaking, you could say. I mean, maybe that's up for debate, but does sometimes get a little inflammatory, maybe more inflammatory depending on how you look at it.
I think is not the appropriate way, in my opinion. It's not the way that I operate. I guess, maybe it's because I lack a marketing degree. I can't come up with that quick, thing that rhymes that catches on with people. I just believe that we need to stay on the policies. When the person called out and said, "Give him hell, Harry," to Harry Truman, and he said, "I just tell the truth and they think it's hell." That's kind of how I see my job. It's my job to point out the problems that exist with the policies that are being put forward and have a debate and really point it out. I don't need to get inflammatory to point out how bad I think some of these ideas are. So that's the way I try to work.
So let's get to raise the age. But we're going to get to energy here in a little bit because you're on a letter regarding that to the governor regarding the draft that's going on right now. But I want to get into raise the age because I know that's something that you've tried to address since it was voted on in 2017, implemented, of course, alongside other criminal justice reform a couple years later. I know there's discussion, especially among the majority right now, in trying to do some fixes to it. We've known the comptroller's come out with his data that shows that the money's not getting out the door the way people would like. Where are you at right now at Raise the Age? As someone also that comes from this portion of the world, right?
Yeah, I was
in your role
say
too.
That. So I did handle some juvenile delinquency cases as an attorney for the child, mostly in Saratoga County Family Court. And so I do think that having worked with youth, I do have a little bit of a different background in the way that I look at things. I think that the case had always been made that we weren't just going to reduce accountability for the youth, but we were also going to push into programming. We wanted to really bolster those programs that were going to help divert youth from crime. And those things, even if the funding has been there, it hasn't been really available or easy to access, and it hasn't been utilized. It just hasn't been spent. And I know that former Albany District Attorney David Soares was very strong on this point and talked about the need to present alternatives to a criminal path. And so it'll be interesting. Usually the way that I look at it is if the other side of the aisle is talking about doing fixes, it's never going to go as far as I think it should go.
Right.
But I also am humble enough to understand the area that I represent, and I've always been an upstater. I've never lived in New York City. I'm not as familiar with the way that things are there. I just know that in Saratoga County, where I've practiced law, that diversion had been used all the time with our youth, and those cases were being sent regularly to family court. And the problem is that if we create a system, which I think we have now, where 16 and 17-year-olds are really not being held accountable and are just revolving door being sent back out. We don't have good data about recidivism because probation, which is usually the entity that's handling, at least upstate, handling how these things are managed, they don't keep the data to see, who's going out and then who's coming right back in again on something else. But we do know the gangs, even Jennifer Tisch in the city has been saying that, they've been, if they're not held accountable, the gangs are really taking advantage of these 16 and 17-year-olds, and they're giving them the guns. And so my side of the aisle, we've got some bills to try to address that. I'd love to see some of those catch fire and move forward next year. But I would suspect, if I had to guess, I would say that the fixes that they're talking about are just going to be, and that's not nothing, but it's just going to be in trying to get the money out there in a better way, which is good. Yeah. But I don't think it really addresses the core problem with Raise the Age.
Yeah, you referenced the funding because right now it's generally this isn't exact, but it's a reimbursement type model instead of doing it up front, which some of the counties I believe have asked for a different way of doing it too. I had a conversation about this recently with the Albany Police Chief Brendan Cox following some of the violence that happened on July 4th in the city and their concerns with juvenile crime. He talked about some legislative fixes to raise the age, as we're kind of referencing here, and the mechanism, and I think you could probably speak to this from your experience of when cases are referred to family court, and if the district attorney should potentially have more power in that. From your experience, is that something that you think could be addressed?
Yeah, I think it could be. I think that we need to take a look at things like that because one thing that really hit me as a practitioner in family court is that 16 and 17-year-olds, we're not necessarily talking about cans of spray paint and graffiti. We're not talking about very minor or low-level things. Some 16 and 17-year-olds, they've done some pretty horrendous things, and they should be held accountable, and there should be a decision-making process. We can't just simply say, brain development is not completely in place until 26, and so we're going to just kind of give a pass. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to go that far in saying that that's what the system does right now, but it does it, I think that we've shifted too far towards that way, and I think we need to moderate and come back a little bit to the middle.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier just the alternative programs, right? And that's where the money hasn't been going, right? From what most people understand.
That's
so
right.
You would be for trying to maybe find a different way to reinvest in that.
Absolutely.
And make sure
I think
that's
you have
happening.
to. I think it has to be a multi-level approach to trying to present alternatives. So you're heading off crime before it happens because you're taking young people on a path that is not criminal. It's not a criminal path, and that involves really pushing into communities and supporting programs to do that. I've had a lot of experience with Boys and Girls Clubs as a huge way to try to present a different way to be, mentoring programs. There's a lot of different things you can do, and each community can kind of try to figure out what's going to be most effective in their own communities. But the other part of it that we can't avoid is that despite all of those efforts that we need to improve, we need to figure out what to do when we do have young people that are going down the wrong path.
I wanted to also ask you about, I know bail reform has come up recently once again with the president's executive order and looking at the municipalities that have implemented cashless bail, which Kathy Hochul says that we don't have cashless bail in New York. That's the whole debate's going on. But I want to ask you about the judge's perspective on this. We had Judge Murphy in here a few months ago. We asked him a bit about this too. And we're seeing elsewhere that some states are trying to put in mechanisms to hold judges accountable in terms of the decisions they make when it comes to this, and saying they have the ability to look at factors, and some of them aren't making the decisions that align with that or making political decisions. Do you think that is one way to work on bail reform, of more of a oversight in what the judges are doing?
No, I think that we need to do what 49 other states do, which is to give judges the discretion to be able to consider risks to public safety for these individuals when they're making bail or no bail determinations. We don't do that. We're the only state that doesn't do it. That's dangerousness, right?
Yeah. That's the word, right? That's the key word. Yeah.
And I think, I've been very frustrated with the governor because she has come out and said numerous times, the law's fine the way it is. It's really that the judges need better training. They just don't understand it. And I didn't have an opportunity to watch your interview with Judge Murphy, but I would probably believe that he would say, no, the judges very well understand what they can and cannot do. And we are essentially legislatively tying, their hands behind their backs in order to do their job properly. So I think we do need to make changes to so-called bail reforms. But I don't know what appetite the majority in Albany is going to have come January. But it's a gubernatorial election year. Everybody in the Senate, everybody in the Assembly, everybody's going to be up for election next year. So, who knows? Who knows?
And public safety obviously is going to be a huge part of all that.
It certainly was a big issue the last governor's race, and so we'll see.
It is interesting because we've now seen, 3 changes to the bail reform, right? And we've also seen changes to the discovery. And now we're potentially going to see changes to raise the age. It really casts the 2019, package, if you will, under a different light, would you say?
I think it's nibbling around the edges. That's my viewpoint. I don't think you're really getting at the heart of what it is. I think we need to do much more fundamental rollbacks of these programs. And that's what we'll continue to argue on our side of the aisle. But it's.
Are you for rollbacks or complete?
Well, I'd
sweep?
like to.
Right.
I'd like to just get rid of the bail reform as it exists right now. I think the raise the age piece. I think my viewpoint as an upstate practitioner is that upstate was already doing it. Maybe there's a problem in the city. Maybe it didn't have to be something that was statewide. And I do believe in investing in communities to try to help our youth to avoid paths to crime. So, I agree with some of what was done. And I do think that people probably came at it from a good place. They wanted to do the right thing. I just think it swung way too far the other way. And that's what you get with one party rule, in my opinion. I mean, there's no moderating influence. So
it's interesting. We go back to 2019 was quite the year because that's also the CLCPA.
Yes, exactly.
So
all the things we're talking about.
This is all the things we're talking about here in 2025, heading into the 2026 session.
Yeah.
You're recently on a letter that was trying to extend public comment period for the New York State, the draft energy plan, right?
Yes.
Right? That's right now being proposed and does have some different goalposts in there regarding the climate law. Why did you sign on to that letter first and foremost?
Well, I think that if you're going to have public comment, you really need to take public comment from all around the state. You can't just do a few and think that that's going to be enough. So that was really the heart of what that letter was. But I think it's also really interesting to see.
Just that addressed like Central New York, Southern Tier, places like that. So just
we have to add some more listening sessions. I do think that the draft's energy plan was a little bit more realistic than what the CLCPA requires. I mean, anytime you take a bureaucracy like the New York State government and you add a bunch of mandates as far as what our energy policy is going to be, it's not going to work out well. So it's not realistic. It's not achievable. And I think most New Yorkers that are just working their jobs and living their lives, they're going to start waking up, I think they are now, to what this is going to do to their energy bills, to what this is going to do for their energy choice. And I think just as bail reform and raise the age was a huge issue in the last gubernatorial race, I think if I had to bet, I'd say energy is going to be a huge issue going into next year.
What do you think is the utility company's role in this? That was a big topic back when the hikes, the increases were approved by the Public Service Commission. What do you think their role is in this? Because I think some called that there was a few different things. People said, well, let's break up these monopolies, right? That antitrust, that was one argument. The other was the PSC, disband or change the way that works. How does that mechanism in your mind all work together in all of this?
Well, I mean, I know that I look at my energy bill and it's considerably higher than it was. We know that there's been an analysis and they say that the CLCPA, those mandates, are responsible for some of that hike. Not all of it, but some of it. So I think really energy providers are kind of agnostic on some of the politics there, right? I mean, if they're being required to produce and provide more natural gas, then they'll produce more natural gas. If they're required to produce more electricity, they have to take steps to do that. And they have to plan ahead and they have to make investments. And depending on which way the legislature and the governor are telling them to go, then those investments are going to cost money. That money gets then passed on to the ratepayers. So in a way, I'm not saying that they're 100% neutral. Maybe they have a point of view. But, I think that as we push more towards electrification, they have to be concerned. Their primary concern really is, I would argue, not profits, which is what the other side says. I think it really is they want to provide reliable energy at the most affordable cost that they can. They need a grid that's going to be reliable. And what I'm worried about is that it's not going to be. If we push forward with the CLCPA goals the way that they are right now, a lot of your listeners might be interested to know that in January of 2026, anything 7 stories or less is going to have to be electric. And that's it. If you already owned your home and your oil burner, doesn't work, or your propane or your natural gas doesn't work, you can have that repaired. Right. But new construction is going to have to be all electric, 7 stories or less. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize that. And there are builders already that are saying, Bob Marini, Mike Dubb up in Saratoga, they're saying, like, we're out of here. We are out of New York. At the exact same time that everyone is complaining that we're in the middle of a housing crisis, that we need more affordable housing options for people. We've got builders saying, we're going to Tennessee, we're going to go to South Carolina. We're not going to build here anymore because we can't afford to do it. So there's an awful lot of moving parts here and things that are going to be coming together. And I think what it all adds up to, and my prediction, is that you're going to see the governor start to moonwalk back on some of these requirements, but it's going to take legislative action to pull back from the CLCPA. Right. In our conference, from from the very beginning, we were saying we need a cost-benefit analysis by an independent third party to say, you know what, if New York is only responsible for 0.04% of worldwide emissions, let's not cripple our economy. Let's take a look and say, all right, we want a cleaner New York State, that's fine. But how do we reduce emissions, but also consider what the cost and impact is going to be? At the same time that the governor and everyone is messaging about affordability to New Yorkers, and New Yorkers leading the nation in out-migration from New York to other places, if we really care about affordability, we've got to take a look at these climate goals and say, are we doing more harm than good by setting these bureaucratic mandates and saying, we must decarbonize by this date and what these guideposts are. So I'll be interested to see once they finish up public comment on this scoping plan, the energy plan, where it ends up. But it seems to me from the draft and reading the draft that they're already starting to take a more pragmatic approach and say, yes, we should be working towards reducing net emissions, but we have to be smart about and realistic about the way that we're doing
It's
it.
an interesting dynamic, too, with Micron.
Yeah.
I think Micron was a big part of that letter as well. I think it's part of the letter, is actually mentioned in there. And the energy that takes. And I think a lot of people have looked at AI and data centers and where New York is, and, of course, looking at semiconductors and things like that. I think that puts New York in an interesting spot. And I believe your conference has advocated more so, correct me if I'm wrong, for more holistic, right, of trying to use different sources and using all those instead of completely getting rid of one or the other. And I know the governor has talked about nuclear in recent days.
She's talked about it. But I mean, that takes a long time
right.
to get that up
Decade.
and running.
Yeah.
And I think that there needs to be a lot of energy choice, particularly for upstate. I have a generator at my house. So if I don't have electricity, I could still run a generator off of propane and be able to heat my house. I have a propane heater in my basement that I can flip on that will heat a room so that until the power comes back on, I can do that. That's not the experience in New York City, but that's the experience upstate. There are still people that burn wood-burning furnaces to heat their homes. So people that I represent want energy choice. And I think that, I really implore the governor and the majority to really consider what's practical here. I think we can, I've got a plug-in hybrid car. I'm into a cleaner environment. I do cleanup events in my district. I mean, I'm for it. I just think that we have to be smart about it and be realistic,
And finally, your priorities as we head into the session in 2026. As you mentioned, it is an election year, so that's probably everyone's always running every 2 years in New York State. But as we head through the rest of the fall and into January, what are you looking at and what do you hope to address?
One of the big things that very, very new this week, and I know that that the station's reported on it, and thank you for that, has to do with all of the animal cruelty cases that we're seeing popping up in New York, in our area, in Argyle and in Washington County, in Half Moon, which I represent. And so I'm with Senator Tedisco and a bipartisan group of legislators to try to create a package of legislation to try to look at these boarding facilities and give guidance about what best practices are and accountability, and take a look at ventilation, take a look at proper feeding and watering, and all of it, because we have these rules in place for shelters. But I was very surprised to find out that we don't have anything on the books outside of New York City for our boarding facilities. So that's a big thing that we're working on now going into the new year. Of course, there are a whole bunch of other bills that, we could get into the weeds and talk about a bunch of them, but that's the one that really comes to mind right now that we really want to get right, and we would like to really see that get done.
It's interesting
into the new year.
That gap and that faction, is really interesting, and of course coming to light under horrendous circumstances.
Yes.
And like you said, it's bipartisan, and this is something you're on the same page on, and I think it's certainly a topic that probably will carry itself into January, I'd imagine, right?
I really hope so. I think it is always shocking. I have a big law library in my office in Albany, and you see that whole wall of all those books, and you think there's got to be a law for everything. And then when you really start to dig in, when something horrible happens, like these cases are really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, the deputies have had to take, time off to try to, because it's been really traumatic
Yeah.
to respond to 20,
Jeez, yeah.
20 plus dogs being killed in one, it's horrible. So you sometimes, we are reactive as a legislature, but I think in this case, this is the appropriate response. We need to create a package, garner support, and, honestly, I can think of nobody better than Senator Tedisco, who has made animal advocacy such a big part of his work in his decades of service. So I'm happy to get on board and take a look at that. I've also separately been working with a few other legislators because, many minds on something usually does result in a better work product. So we have some ideas as well that we want to advance as well. So we'll see what we come up with.
And I know I asked you before, I think it was right before the session, of being the floor leader. Now that you went through, obviously you've done that before, but like in that role, what did you like about it? What was that? What is that like, and how do you want to do it as you move forward here?
I didn't know. I was a little, you get butterflies, when you're going to start anything new.
Yeah.
I'd been the assistant floor leader, but taking over, I loved it. I loved it. I have a wonderful assistant floor leader, Jarek Gandolfo from Long Island, who's sitting like second chair to me. I have wonderful floor counsel, and it's a big team effort. But I was so proud of my conference that we know that we are going to be outvoted on the floor, but making that legislative record, conducting really good debate that's going to identify the pros and cons of each piece of legislation that comes up. And really, the way I was approaching it this year, I think worked out well, which is to say, who is the best person to debate this particular bill? It's not always me. We have experts in different areas within our conference. So whenever a bill came up, I really tried to tap in to, some members just won't debate. They don't want to debate.
Yeah.
But of those who do, to reach out to them, to help them prepare, to help them feel comfortable about taking it on. We had new members who hit their buttons and got up and debated bills. And so I think it was a great team effort, and I really loved it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'll watch, and I think a lot of the other people that follow the Capitol do, and sometimes those questions will trigger stories, like, or trigger questions of our own to say, oh, that's actually a really good point, or that's a good thought. Maybe we need to go deeper into this. So I do appreciate, I think that's really interesting. Does it get tiring? I mean, at the end?
At the end, you kind of say, oh, really? We're going to do that bill too?
Because you can't really sit, you don't really have the benefit of being able, when, of course, those final days of session can go into, I think one went to 4 or 5 in the morning, right? You don't have the benefit of being able to, I can rest for a few hours, right?
No, you don't, but the adrenaline kind of carries you through. And I think the thing that is very exciting to me is that all session long, we have been laying bills aside. Some of those bills will never come back. And really, it's the majority who decides which bills will come back. We don't really know what that's going to be.
Right. And you kind
of that's going to be.
You have to adapt.
We have to adapt. And there's no particular theme to it. So it's not, sometimes they have packages where it's like, okay, we're going to do a criminal justice package or a consumer package or something. But more often than not, particularly at the end, it's like a free-for-all.
Like
you just
surprise,
have to be ready to roll.
Yeah.
So you get the bill packet and you just get up and you do it.
Yeah,
but
interesting.
I like it.
Yeah, that's great. Mary Beth Walsh, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.